On a quiet Wednesday night in Toledo, Ohio, when the streets had long surrendered to sleep and only faint yellow lights draped gently across the damp sidewalks, a sleek black SUV cruised silently down Reynolds Road. There was nothing flashy about it, just a clean government-issued vehicle, discreet and orderly, much like the woman behind the wheel. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace sat with steady hands on the steering wheel, her gaze focused but unstrained, her thoughts already drifting homeward to the warmth of a waiting kitchen light and the familiar ticking of the clock. She had just wrapped up a lengthy military meeting at a base more than 2 hours south. It had been a long day filled with discipline and duty, yet she voiced no complaints because after more than 2 decades in uniform, this was simply her rhythm. The car moved smoothly through each intersection, no sudden turns, no erratic braking, her speed consistent, her manner calm. There were no signs of any traffic violation. But further ahead, hidden beneath thick foliage and the dull glow of a street lamp, someone was watching. Officer Daniel Mercer sat slouched in his patrol car, holding a cup of coffee gone cold, scrolling through his phone in boredom. The entire evening had passed with no emergency calls, nothing urgent, only the kind of stillness he always found suspicious. When Adrienne's SUV glided past, something shifted in his posture. An unfamiliar vehicle, government plates, tinted windows. That was enough to raise suspicion. He tossed the coffee cup onto the passenger seat, flicked on the lights, and accelerated. The red and blue lights lit up Adrienne's rearview mirror. She blinked, not startled, not rushed. She simply turned on, her signal pulled to the side, and came to a clean stop. This was not her first time being pulled over, but something in the air felt different. The wind rustled through the roadside trees, whispering like a quiet warning. In the side mirror, she saw the patrol car door slam shut. Then a tall figure approached, one hand resting on his holster, the other holding a flashlight pointed straight at a window. He did not circle to the passenger side as most would. He came directly to the driver's door, his beam aimed square at her face. His voice, when it came, was sharp, void of courtesy. License and registration. Adrienne kept her hands visible on the steering wheel and rolled down the window halfway. Officer, may I ask why I am being stopped? Mercer squinted into the beam of his own light. You changed lanes without signaling, seemed to be swerving, looked like you might be under the influence. Adrienne raised her brow slightly but remained calm. I did not do that. Mercer repeated his demand louder this time. License and registration. She did not argue. She moved deliberately, opened the glove compartment, and handed over the documents. This is a government vehicle. I am a federal employee. Mercer glanced at the ID, then smirked. Military, huh? Yes. His tone turned dismissive. That does not put you above the law. Adrienne stayed composed. I never said it did. But Mercer's tone hardened. Step out of the vehicle. She hesitated. Excuse me. I said step out. I am conducting a sobriety check. Adrienne clenched her jaw but kept her tone even. On what grounds? I have complied. I have not been drinking. I want to know the reason. Mercer stepped closer, voice firm. Are you refusing a lawful order? Adrienne stayed still. I am asking for clarification, not refusing. He did not like that. Without another word, he opened her door himself, the sound slicing through the quiet street. Adrienne did not flinch. Instead, she reached for her phone, turned on the camera, and spoke calmly. This interaction is being recorded. Mercer glanced at the phone, a flicker of hesitation passing over his face, but he did not stop. Out of the car, Adrienne stepped out, her posture upright, not defiant, but unshaken. She did not yell. did not resist, but the way she moved, the steadiness in her eyes made it clear she was no ordinary woman. Even in civilian clothes, her presence commanded pause. Mercer studied her for a moment, something in his gaze, questioning who he was actually dealing with. But his ego was louder than his instincts. He proceeded with the field test, making her walk a straight line under the street lamp as if she were some drunk driver after a night out. Adrian followed every instruction with quiet precision. No missteps, no hesitation, no sign of impairment. Yet Mercer still wrote her a citation for failure to maintain lane. Adrian took the ticket without a word, only offering a look. It was not angry, not pleading, but heavy. The kind of look that makes a person think twice long after it is over. She returned to her vehicle and disappeared into the night. But what Mercer did not know was that the paper in her hand would not end up forgotten in some filing cabinet. It would reappear in a courtroom not as a minor infraction, but as the start of a reckoning. Because this time his badge would not protect him. This time it would become a question mark, a symbol under scrutiny, a test of what happens when power meets principle and finds itself on trial. The next morning, a light rain fell over Toledo. Raindrops tapped gently against the windshield like the steady heartbeat of someone slipping back into a familiar routine. Officer Daniel Mercer arrived at the police station as usual, his gait unhurried yet steady. 15 years in the force had taught him to move with a near absolute confidence. He was not a man of many words and even less of introspection. He trusted his instincts, trusted the authority of that small metal badge on his chest, and truly believed that once you wore the symbol of the law, yours was the final word. To his fellow officers, Mercer was the model cop. He arrived on time, filed his reports, never dodged responsibility, and never hesitated in tense situations. From complex traffic accidents to neighborhood disputes, he was there, face stoic, voice firm. Because of that, many in the department saw him as a standard, a law enforcement machine unshaken by pressure. And precisely because of that, few dared to question him. The new recruits kept their distance. The veterans quietly accepted him. And any voices of dissent, if they existed, were often buried beneath vague reports and the silent shield of internal protection. Mercer knew this well. He understood how the system worked, and he knew he had long been favored within it. He had been complained about before, flagged for his attitude, criticized for being too quick to anger, too prone to bark orders instead of engaging. But each time, the complaints drifted away like rain on glass. No charges, no consequences. Most grievance forms never left the department walls. They ended in soft conversations behind closed doors. And Mercer, unrepentant, returned to work without ever having to apologize, never imagining he might one day stand before a judge. That was why, when he returned from his night shift, he logged the Adrian Wallace stop as nothing more than routine. A few brief notes. Lane deviation. Suspicion of impairment. No resistance. No arrest. He did not even bother reviewing his body cam footage, just docked the device into its charger and walked off like it was any other day. To him, the matter was done, and the name Wallace was just another woman flashing her government ID, like it was some magic shield. In his mind, that only made it more important to remind her who held the real authority on that road. Later that day, during lunch break, Mercer sat in the lounge ripping open a bag of chips as he recounted the incident to a few colleagues like it was some amusing story. Some woman thought she was a general or something, flashing her federal badge, trying to play above the law. He chuckled, his eyes gleaming with smugness. But when he mentioned the name Wallace, one nearby officer suddenly turned his head. Officer Diaz, a man not known for inserting himself into Mercer's stories, paused. He furrowed his brow and asked, "Wallace, what was her full name?" Mercer replied casually, "Adrian Wallace." Diaz went quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace? She taught at the academy last year." Then, as if something dawned on him, his tone dropped. "She is not just some admin. She is the senior logistics officer at Fort Wayne. She has been in 2 major campaigns. Real person, real work." Mercer leaned back slightly, caught off guard, but quickly waved it off. "I do not care who she is. Out there on the street, I am the authority." But what unsettled him was not her rank. It was the way Diaz spoke of her, with respect, with subtle warning, as if Mercer had unknowingly crossed someone he should not have. That hint of caution cracked a sliver in Mercer's arrogant armor. It did not break him, but it was enough to plant a question in the back of his mind. Still, his instinct to push back was louder than any doubt. He believed things would settle just as they always had. What Mercer did not know was that only hours after that conversation, a formal complaint had already been submitted to the Office of the Inspector General. Not only that, but the video Adrian recorded was now being reviewed by the military's legal team. His name had begun to circulate in conversations far beyond his local chain of command. And this time, the woman he thought he could intimidate into silence with a flimsy citation had made a different choice. She chose to record, she chose to speak, she chose to act. Not with fury, not with shouting, but with unwavering resolve, with principle, and above all, with justice. Inside a quiet office at Fort Wayne morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and cast gentle streaks of light across a desk filled with documents. Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Wallace sat silently in front of her screen, her hand wrapped around a coffee cup, still steaming softly. She had not slept all night, not because of fear or anxiety, but because her mind kept replaying every second of the encounter the night before. The way the officer approached without a greeting, the suspicious stare, as if she were some kind of threat, the hand resting on the weapon like a silent warning, all of it weaving into a memory that refused to fade. She was not furious in a loud or reckless way, but there was a deep and quiet anger inside her, born from the understanding that what happened was neither new nor isolated, and it surely would not be the last time. She had lived too long in spaces where other people's eyes always carried judgment. As a black woman wearing a military uniform, she had to work twice as hard just to be treated as ordinary. But through more than 20 years in service, Adrian had never chosen the path of noise. She believed in principles and systems, in doing what was right. But because of that, she also understood the limits of silence. Silence at times was not strength, it was surrender. It was letting people like Mercer repeat their patterns unchecked. This time, she could not remain silent. Not because she felt personally insulted, but because she knew she could not keep swallowing injustice without standing up. Every time she did, she sent a message to people like Mercer that power could be abused without consequence. She opened her laptop, retrieved the video from her phone, backed it up to a secure drive, and sent a copy to her legal team on base. No commentary, no emotional statement, just evidence, just truth. Everything was captured clearly. Mercer's voice, his unnecessary suspicion, his unfounded questions, and the threatening tone, even as she fully complied. Then she forwarded the same file to the Office of the Inspector General along with a detailed report. No exaggeration, no dramatics. Just a factual account, step by step, word for word, action for action. She did not need to add anything more. The video said it all. Meanwhile, at the Toledo Police Department, Mercer continued his shift like nothing had happened. He sat behind the wheel, sunglasses hiding his absent gaze, unaware that his name was now being typed into emails exchanged by people far above his local command. He still believed the matter was done just like all the other times. His confidence was not unfounded. Throughout his career, Mercer had been the subject of multiple complaints, but each time someone stepped in to cover, supervisors let it go. The union defended him. Grievances got lost in the maze of internal paperwork that never reached public light. He learned that if he just stayed quiet and kept steady, the storm would always pass. And more importantly, if the person on the other side lacked power, nothing would happen. But this time, the person in that black SUV was not just another black woman with a federal badge. This time, it was a military officer with a flawless record, someone who had managed logistics for hundreds of operations across 4 continents, who had overseen lives, supplies, security, and morale for thousands of troops. Someone whose every decision was documented, evaluated, and directly tied to mission outcomes. Someone whose words carried weight not just within her unit, but at tables in the Department of Defense. And most importantly, this time she had proof, she had legal support, and she had a system willing to listen. And she was ready to face it all. As Mercer finished his shift that afternoon, he had no idea that hundreds of miles away, a closed-door meeting had already taken place. Inside that room, Adrian's most trusted attorney paused the video and replayed the moment Mercer approached the vehicle with his hand on the gun before any resistance had been shown. She emphasized that this was not just unprofessional conduct, but potentially a threat, a violation of civil rights, especially when the individual stopped was a federal employee in a government-issued vehicle. The issue was not just about tone. It was about abuse of authority in a situation with no legitimate cause. Adrian was not present in that meeting. She was in her own office reviewing training schedules for incoming recruits, reading logistics reports for the upcoming autumn exercise. For her, the work continued. The responsibilities remained. She had no desire to turn the incident into a media storm, nor did she wish to appear on the evening news as some symbol of defiance. She only wanted the truth to be acknowledged, and if possible, a warning to be sent. She knew that if she did not act, perhaps no one would. And if someone like her with rank and stability could still be treated like that, how much worse would it be for others without those protections? The camera was not a weapon. It was a mirror to reflect the nature of power, a mirror so the world could see that sometimes quiet, calm, and timely actions can shift an entire system that once seemed untouchable. Adrian did not record that moment to threaten. She did it to remind the world that she was not just a woman driving home. She was a citizen, an officer, and a voice for those who had no camera in their hands when the truth was twisted by bias and unchecked power. While most people only saw a simple traffic stop caught on video, Adrian Wallace saw something else. She saw the reflection of 1,000 silences that had come before. She saw the shadows of the young women she had once trained, black women, who had learned to bow their heads to avoid conflict, to hold back their voices, so they would not be labeled defiant, to stay quiet, so they would not be judged as emotional or out of control. She remembered the eyes of new recruits who once asked her how to survive in a system that was not always fair. And she realized if even she, a woman who had led military convoys through war zones, who had managed logistics in international relief efforts, could be suspected just for driving a black SUV past midnight, how many others had no voice at all? Adrienne did not want noise. She was not looking for bold headlines or sensational coverage. She only wanted one thing: for the truth to be acknowledged and for abuse of authority to stop. She knew this was not a fight for revenge. It was an act to make change, even if that change was small. So after filing the formal complaint and submitting the video to her legal team, Adrienne went on with her work as usual. She arrived at the base on time, reviewed logistics plans, guided new recruits through safety procedures in the military supply depot. She moved as if nothing had happened, but every step she took carried quiet resolve. She did not need to shout for justice. She only needed to stand firm. Inside the military, the story of the traffic stop began to circulate, not through media channels, but through quiet conversations among senior officers. The name Adrienne Wallace was not unfamiliar. They had known her through flawless reports, through commendations for her ability to organize and lead in high-stress operations. But this time, they spoke of her not for a successful campaign, but for a silent act of resistance against misused power. Behind closed doors, legal teams within the military began reviewing whether the incident violated federal policy, especially given that she had been on official duty in a government vehicle. Adrienne knew all this was unfolding behind the scenes, but she did not interfere, did not call for updates, did not push for action. She focused instead on preparation. In her office, she and her personal attorney reviewed the footage over and over, making notes on every move, every word, every detail that could show the stop had no legal basis. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, a seasoned professional with experience in federal civil rights cases, looked at her with quiet respect. She knew Adrienne was not easily shaken, but she also knew that taking this to court would not be easy. When she asked Adrienne if she was truly ready to see this through, Adrienne answered with a steady nod. "If I don't do this, then who will?" Meanwhile, in another world, Daniel Mercer still had no idea that the cracks had begun to form. He continued. His patrols continued barking orders at drivers in the wrong lane, continued issuing commands with the same practiced tone that had become second nature. He did not know that a letter bearing his name was being printed, that an envelope with legal weight was waiting to be mailed. He also did not know that the woman who did not yell, who did not fight back, who did not make a scene, had enough strength to make the entire system pay attention. When that envelope was sent inside, it was a copy of a civil rights complaint. Mercer was still eating lunch in the break room like it was any other day. In his mind, the story was over. But in truth, it had just begun. Adrienne was not naive. She knew truth alone was sometimes not enough. She had seen reports, ignored videos, left unwatched testimonies dismissed because they came from the wrong mouth. But this time she had evidence. More importantly, she had her name, her record, her unblemished service standing behind her. That did not make her arrogant. It only made her feel more responsible. She had mentored generations of new soldiers. She had told them that honor was not about medals, but about how you respond when no one is watching. And now she was living by the very words she once taught. She was not waiting for an apology from Mercer. She was not looking for public praise. All she wanted was a record, an official document, a clear ruling from the court that what he did was wrong and that there would be consequences. Because justice does not come from outrage. It comes from persistence. And Adrian, with her calm patience, was showing the entire system that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the quiet before a strike that lands with perfect precision. 3 weeks after the night she was pulled over on a cold February morning, a thin manila envelope found its way into Daniel Mercer's hands. His name was printed clearly on the front just above the address of the Lucas County Civil Court. He tore it open while standing in the parking lot behind the precinct, still holding a cup of hot coffee. At first, he thought it was just another routine administrative notice, but as he read the opening lines, his hand stiffened. A summons, a lawsuit alleging constitutional violations. The plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Wallace. The accusations: unlawful detention, threat of force, abuse of authority while on duty. Mercer stood still, eyes locked on the black letters against the white page, unable to believe that what he had considered a closed case was now pulling him into a real courtroom. He let out a sharp laugh as if trying to shake off the unease rising in his chest. No way this had gone that far. She wasn't arrested, wasn't touched. Everything followed procedure. He kept telling himself that, but deep down, a crack was starting to widen. When he walked back into the station, something in the air felt different. There were no loud laughs when he told a story, no admiring glances from the new recruits. Instead, there were quiet stares, averted eyes like they all knew something he didn't. An hour after receiving the summons, Mercer was called into the captain's office. The door closed behind him, the blinds drawn, and the room's atmosphere turned heavy. Across from him sat Captain Reading, a man who rarely looked serious unless something was truly wrong. Reading sat upright, didn't smile, didn't waste time. "We need to talk," he said. "That traffic stop last month, the woman you pulled over, she's suing." Mercer crossed his arms. "She thinks she's a victim." "I didn't do anything wrong." Reading didn't respond immediately. "Do you even know who she is?" "She was just a federal employee with an attitude. I didn't know her rank." Reading leaned forward. "She's Lieutenant Colonel Wallace. She used to run logistics at Fort Wayne. Impeccable service record, highly respected, and she has video of the entire stop from both your body cam and her phone." Mercer bit his lip. For the first time since the incident, he had no rebuttal. He knew how the system worked, but he also knew one thing: when the military got involved, things didn't disappear so easily. His captain didn't yell at him, didn't defend him either, but his tone and eyes said enough. This was no longer just an internal matter. And as Mercer left the office, he could feel the shift more clearly. The confused stares, the strange silence in the hallway, the forced nods. From someone once at the top, he was now slowly becoming someone who could be discarded. While Mercer wrestled with his thoughts over in Fort Wayne, Adrian remained calm. She didn't go to the press, didn't make statements. She spent her time reviewing legal documents, preparing her testimony with her lawyer. No panic, no desire to hide. She had faced worse situations. But what made her treat this case with absolute seriousness was that it touched something deep within her, a part that had endured silent wounds for too long. This time she had a chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Her attorney, Delaney Price, a sharp, pragmatic woman who had handled many federal civil rights cases, looked at her long and hard during their final prep meeting. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? It will be public. The media might get involved. It'll stay on your record forever." Adrian simply smiled. "I don't want attention. I want clarity. This isn't personal. This is about principle, about fairness." On the day of the trial, Adrian did not wear a business suit or something casual. She wore her full military uniform with all medals and rank displayed clearly. Not to show off, but to remind everyone that she was not just a black woman pulled over in the middle of the night. She was an officer who had served her country with honor and responsibility. She wanted the court to see that. She wanted the jury to understand that behind her calm demeanor was a life of service that one act of misconduct could deeply wound. Mercer sat at the defendant's table wearing a dark suit, his usual confidence gone. When Adrian entered, posture, upright, eyes steady, the medals on her chest catching the light above. Mercer glanced at her for a few seconds before looking away. For the first time, he couldn't face her. For the first time, he realized he may have seriously misjudged the woman he had once dismissed. And this was only the beginning. Inside the Lucas County Civil Courtroom, the air was tight, like a drawn string. There were no television cameras, no chanting crowds, only orderly wooden benches, dim white lights, and silent gazes. The back rows were filled not out of curiosity, but out of respect. A group of military officers from Fort Wayne sat quietly, uniforms, crisp eyes, not tense, but sharply observant. Beside them were everyday citizens, people who had never met Adrian but had followed the lawsuit on social media and wanted to witness what they believed could be a turning point for justice. When Adrian was called to the stand, she walked slowly, adjusted her collar, raised her head, and held her gaze steady. She didn't look like someone pursuing a lawsuit, but like someone recounting an event with the precision of a soldier who had walked through battlefields. Her voice was calm and steady, neither angry nor bitter, just clear and deliberate narration. "I was driving home from a meeting at about 11:15 at night. I didn't change lanes abruptly. I showed no signs of being impaired. When asked to pull over, I fully complied. When I asked for a reason, none was given. When I said I was a federal employee, he was condescending and ordered me out of the vehicle without lawful cause." Her attorney, Delaney Price, stood nearby, nodding slightly with each response. After the testimony, she played the video recorded on Adrian's phone. The entire room held its breath. On screen, Adrian spoke in a calm tone while Mercer leaned in hand near his weapon, eyes narrowed with suspicion. His flashlight was aimed directly at her face. He didn't explain the stop, only repeated commands. Though Adrian displayed no erratic behavior, no sign of alcohol, she was still ordered to perform a field sobriety test by walking a straight line. She completed it flawlessly, yet still received a citation. There was no physical aggression, but his demeanor was unmistakably dismissive and threatening. When the video ended, no one spoke. Only the scratching of the court reporter's pen and the faint sound of breathing broke the silence. Then came the footage from Mercer's body cam. It confirmed everything Adrian had said. His tone was sharp, his commands were fragmented and impatient, and his eyes scanned her like she was a suspect. Once that footage finished, the jury didn't need further explanation. What they needed, they had already seen. Then the defense attorney stood to cross-examine. He moved slowly, trying to keep his voice soft, as if sugarcoating the pointed questions he was about to ask. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, is it possible Officer Mercer was simply following protocol?" Adrian looked him in the eye. No, because I complied fully and no clear reason was given. He continued, could it be that he was concerned for his safety? I was driving lawfully, I was sober, I was calm. There was no threat. Then why did you record the interaction? Because I know silence doesn't protect you. I needed to document the truth. The attorney paused, then asked, do you believe police should have discretion in how they handle situations? Adrian answered firmly, discretion must be paired with discipline. Power is not a shield, it is a responsibility. Her answer quieted the room. Even the judge tilted slightly as if to commit every word to memory. Then it was Mercer's turn. He wasn't called to testify, only asked to sit and watch his own behavior replayed. As the footage ran back through each frame, each step, each suspicious glance and commanding tone, Mercer sat stiffly. The prosecutor asked, why did you order her out of the vehicle? Mercer spoke softly. She seemed evasive. Did she resist any commands? She questioned them. Is questioning unlawful? Number, did she yell, threaten, or act aggressively? Number, then what justified escalating the encounter? Mercer fell silent. The prosecutor went on. Did you know she was a lieutenant colonel? I didn't at the time. What if you had known? Mercer exhaled. I probably would have acted differently. That rare honesty echoed through the room like a hard truth. It wasn't exactly remorse. It was an admission that couldn't be denied. And that was what made everyone pause. Because if Mercer had known her rank, he would have acted differently, which meant the problem wasn't Adrian's behavior. The problem was that he assumed she didn't hold enough status to deserve respect. And that was the very essence of discrimination. After the hearing, Adrian left the courthouse in silence. She gave no statements, didn't smile, didn't wave to reporters. She walked out like someone who had completed a mission not to win a fight, but to force others to confront what they had long avoided. Truth doesn't always need to be dramatized. It only needs to be recognized. And Adrian, with her steady voice and upright stance, made sure the entire room listened. 3 days after the final arguments concluded, the Lucas County Courthouse quietly convened to deliver its judgment. There were no rows of uniforms, no watchful stares from senior officers, and none of the media frenzy some had anticipated. Only a handful of steadfast individuals returned, among them Adrian and her attorney Delaney, seated in the front row with calm expressions. There was no hopefulness, no anxiety, just a poised stillness, like people who had already braced themselves for any outcome. Across the aisle, Daniel Mercer sat beside his lawyer, fingers tightly interlaced, eyes fixed ahead, as though clinging to the last fragments of composure after days of relentless scrutiny. Before Judge Morales read the verdict, the room was motionless. No shifting in seats, no fidgeting hands. Everyone understood that this moment was more than just a ruling on a lawsuit. It was the closing note to a long song of behavior that had gone unchecked, unchallenged, unpunished. When the judge lifted the case file, her gaze swept across the courtroom and paused on Adrian. Her voice rang out steady, each word sculpted not just for legal weight, but for moral clarity. In the case of Wallace versus Mercer, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Based on clear video evidence and credible testimony, the court finds that there was a violation of constitutional rights through an unjustified stop, unlawful detention, and the use of intimidation inconsistent with the duties of law enforcement. Mercer didn't flinch. He sat motionless, his eyes blank, his shoulders slightly slumped. No furrowed brows, no protests, no smirk of defiance. Only a man confronting the consequences of an arrogance that once seemed untouchable. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something, perhaps reassurance, perhaps guidance on appeal, but even that voice had lost the confident timbre of a defender used to bending the rules. The judge continued her words, thickening the air with each sentence. The court orders the defendant to compensate the plaintiff with $35,000 in damages. While this is not a criminal case, the file will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and to reassess enforcement training procedures. And as a final note, her tone lowered. A badge is a symbol of protection, not a tool of fear. Anyone who forgets that must be prepared to face the consequences. As her final words settled into the room, there were no cheers, no applause. Only a heavy silence, like fog, rolling into the courtroom. Adrian didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She gave a quiet nod as if closing a necessary chapter to move forward. For her, this wasn't a victory to save her, but a confirmation that she was right not to remain silent. That conviction, when grounded in truth, can shift something real. As she exited the courthouse, she ignored the press waiting outside. She walked slowly, pulled out her phone, and opened a message from the court clerk. Case closed. Plaintiff wins. She smiled faintly. Not because of the money, but because truth had been acknowledged on paper, impossible to erase or ignore. Across the street, Mercer hurried down the steps, his face shielded by a folder, avoiding the eyes of passing strangers. He said nothing, issued no statement, made no plea to clear his name. He just got into his car and drove away, leaving behind a faded image and a career on the verge of collapse. Inside the police department, news of the ruling spread fast, no longer whispers, no longer after-hour chatter. It became official documentation, an internal file, a subject everyone was now forced to confront. On the station's bulletin board, one line appeared. Officer Mercer suspended pending investigation. Back at Fort Wayne, Adrian returned to her base as if she had never left. She still checked supply inventories, still trained recruits, still kept the same punctuality and discipline. But from that day on, the cadets looked at her differently, not just for the stripes on her uniform, but because they had seen someone who truly used their authority to uphold justice, not to evade it. And in the first internal meeting after the verdict, Adrian said only one sentence. We don't need to shout to demand respect, and we don't need to bow to be seen. Steadiness is the strongest declaration a person can carry. 2 months after the trial closed, Monday morning at Fort Wayne began like any other day. Inside the training hall, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting warm rays across rows of new recruits seated upright in crisp uniforms. Their faces gleamed with the innocence of those who had never seen a battlefield. They were not there that day to learn how to fire a weapon or memorize commands. They came to hear something no military handbook could fully teach, about dignity, about responsibility, and about how to hold onto honor in moments most tempting to lose it. On the podium, Adrian Wallace stepped forward with no flowery introduction. She carried none of the shine of someone who had just won a lawsuit and none of the weariness of one who had survived too much silence. All she brought was a slim folder, a thoughtful gaze, and a question that seemed deceptively simple. How many of you believe that putting on this uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hesitant hands rose. Some glances darted around. A few half smiles flickered. Adrian nodded slowly. She understood. That misconception wasn't rare. Then she said, respect is not a prize that comes with power. It is the result of every action, every choice you make each day when no one is watching. She did not mention Mercer by name, did not bring up the lawsuit, the compensation, or the courtroom that had made national news. But she told them about a night when someone in uniform, without the calm that should have come with it, chose power over reason. She spoke of the feeling of being viewed as a threat just for the color of her skin, for her gender, for standing tall. She shared that sometimes silence is wise, but sometimes that very silence feeds the wrong. And she had chosen not to stay silent, not to fight a man, but to protect what was right. She told those recruits that someday they might be the ones giving the orders. But before giving orders, learn to listen. Before using authority, understand the fear in the eyes across from you. Before making any decision, ask yourself, am I being fair? Am I being clear-headed? Am I carrying the discipline this badge demands? Because strength is not in the loudest command or the boldest move, it is in the control you maintain when you have the power to do otherwise. When the other person has no defense, your restraint becomes their last shield. The hall was silent. No questions, no interruptions. Only quiet eyes following her, and slow nods rippling like waves on the shore of reflection. Adrian didn't need to say much. She closed the folder, looked across the rows one last time, then ended simply. You don't just wear this uniform for yourselves. You wear it for those who came before and those who will follow. The way you act today leaves footprints for others. So choose the path that lets you look back one day and say you never bowed out of fear, but you also never bowed because of pride. The session ended with no applause, no ceremony, only the sound of boots stepping away from the room carrying something heavier than commands, deeper than lectures, and stronger than any oath. It was a lesson Adrian brought not with theories, but with the truth. She had lived with the scar she never showed, but everyone could feel. In a quiet corner near the back, Adrian's assistant leaned in and asked gently, "Do you think the lawsuit changed anything?" Adrian looked out the window where sunlight touched the practice field, where young lives stepped into a world they had not yet tasted. She replied, "I don't know. But if next time someone in uniform stops a woman on the road and thinks twice before reaching for their weapon, then maybe that's already change." As for Mercer, he never returned to his post. An internal investigation was opened, his record re-examined, and old complaints once ignored were now pulled into the light. No one knew if he would be removed or quietly transferred. But the armor he once hid behind had cracked, and nothing could patch it back. Those who once feared him now looked at him as a warning no one wished to repeat. Adrian never called herself a hero. She never claimed to be a symbol for any movement. But in the way she stood calm, without noise, without pleading for sympathy, she taught something lasting. That in a world where voices are often drowned, where power is too often misused, quiet courage, when joined with truth, can still turn the tide. No bold slogans needed, no raised fists. Just one person stepping out from the dark with steady feet saying, "I saw it, I endured it, and I will not accept it again."